this period, Hank. So in the context of that book, what was the most interesting conversation, most memorable you had with the president during this crisis?
Well, I had many memorable conversations with him. He was a remarkable man because as I think about it, first of all, I had a year to build a relationship with him before the crisis, a relationship of trust, or it wouldn't have worked, number one. Number two, for the better part of a year, I kept bringing him bad news. And he never was saying what's wrong or he was encouraging me, saying, you're my wartime general. But I would say one of the most, I had many memorable conversations. He was quite accessible. We both were early risers. He'd be in the office quite early. I could always get him before 7. But to me, one of the most memorable conversations was sometime after President Obama was elected, mid to late November, when after we thought we'd stabilized the markets, and then Citigroup came, unglued. And we knew we were going to have to do some things over the weekend, or if Citigroup went down, they had this huge institution, multi-trillion dollars, $500 billion of deposits outside of the U.S. that weren't insured. And I was really down. Now, it turns out what we did worked. And he came over to see me at Treasury. I usually went to see him at the White House. And he said, are you sleeping? And I said, no. and he said, what are you worried about? And I think I might have said I'm worried about being Andrew Mellon, et cetera, et cetera. But basically what he said is, Hank, you should welcome this. You should welcome this. You've been trained for this, that be thankful it's happening. First of all, he said, we're not, you're not Andrew Mellon, we're Roosevelt Run, and we're doing what needs to be done, and we're going to do what needs to be done to protect the economy. But then he went on to say, you've been trained for this, and you and I trust each other, we know how to work together. Just think what would happen if it happened at the beginning of an administration where a Treasury Secretary and a president didn't have a working relationship. So that was that was what George Bush was like.
Overseas for a second, to a country you know well, traveled to a lot, both in your job as Treasury Secretary, as head of Goldman, and as a private citizen, and that's China. So I was in Shanghai about a year ago, September. And for the first time on that visit to China, I heard something that really stuck in my ear and rattled around a lot. I heard from more than one people a version of this. These were from Chinese investors and business people. Make your money and get out. Make your money and get out. I heard people expressing a real lack of optimism about the future. And since then, there's just been a growing litany in the media that China's growth statistics are either untrue or are headed for a fall. Are the wheels on tight in China? Should we be worried about China? Because if China goes from 8% growth to 1% growth, the whole world is going to feel that.
Well, Tom, for some time, I have been saying that China's growth model is running out of steam. And it's a model that is very dependent on investment, very dependent on government investment, very dependent on exports. So there's no doubt that they need to change their growth model, number one. Number two, that reform in China had stalled for some time. Part of that is related to the financial crisis, quite frankly. I mean, because their stimulus plan and some of the things they did there in terms of their lending stimulus and so on, set back their reform plans. But so they've got a lot of work to do, and there's no doubt in my mind there's going to be some bumps in the road. I would point out, though, that the current leadership team is really strong. Xi Jinping, Li Keqiang, the premier, the whole standing committee. And so the good news is they're committed to reform, and so and they know what needs to be done. So, but it's very, very hard when you look at all the moving parts to change the model, how to sequence it, the scope, the scale, the timing, the sequence, and then their system, although very, very different from our system, there's still vested interests that oppose reform. And if you look at the problems that we're having, economic problems really are not economic problems, they're government problems. Getting the government to act. And so the key test is going to be what this leadership team is willing to do. And I think there have been some very positive signs in terms that they really are working to change the model, and they're slowing down growth and other things. Now I spend a lot of time there. Most of my activity is at Paulson Institute, which is engagement with China, think and do tank, and really focused on urbanization in China, sustainable urbanization, because that's going to drive economic and environmental outcomes around the globe. And again, here, you've got it right, that the worry on our part shouldn't be, is China going to eat our lunch? Because if China has problems, every one of our problems, whether it's economic or environmental, are going to be tougher to meet. And if we have problems, and our problems have impacted them. And so it's critically important that we find ways to work together. And our government, believe it or not, can help, and it does help, encourage their reformers. Just this bilateral investment treaty that the Bush administration and Chinese leadership announced after their strategic and economic dialogue, as they negotiate that will help the reformers in China do some of the things they need to do. But yes, there are economic problems in China. I tend to be an optimist in terms of China solving their problems longer term, intermediate and longer term. But again, there are going to be some bumps in the road.
Well, we do live in a world now that has really gone from connected to interconnected to interdependent, and when that happens, you get seems to be a very interesting inversion. Not only, well, first of all, your friends can kill you much faster than your enemies, and so that's also your rivals falling, like China, is actually much more dangerous than your rivals rising. So let's speak about our friends now. Europe. Is there any hope for Europe?
Oh my gosh, I thought we were going to talk about the financial crisis. I guess we are talking about the financial crisis. I want to talk about 5 years ago. But so, yes, Europe, it's interesting to relate it to what we went through. I wrote On the Brink. It was really a story of a crash between politics and markets and economics, because it happened, just weeks ahead of the U.S. Election, a national election. And I wrote that when politics and markets collide, markets ultimately win. Now you're seeing that writ large in Europe. And so they've got, again, a very strong, leadership at their central bank with Mario Draghi and the ECB, and he's buying time. But the fundamental issues have to be solved by the politicians, right? Because the fundamental issues are the structural issues that aren't sustainable. The monetary union has to become more of a fiscal and a political union, and that's going to take time. And some of these fiscal problems that individual nations have, structural problems, is going to take time. And so while politics is grinding, the politics are grinding there, and they're going to grind slowly. I think this will continue to drag on. It'll drag on for years. And even with their banks, one of the things we did something that hadn't been done before, I think, in history, getting out ahead and recapitalizing the banking system before banks failed. And Europe didn't do that. They nationalized failing banks, and many of their banks still aren't adequately capitalized, so that creates an added issue. But it is, so I think we need to, and you've made very skillfully, as you always do, you've made the point that, China has got challenges, Europe has challenges, which is going to be dragging on for some time. Japan has got structural issues. Brazil has slowed down, all of which is, things are going to create some headwinds and some risks here for us in the United States.